Now, in this webinar, we're going to talk about what we call the 12 disciplines, which was how do these companies turn alignment into a competitive advantage? Because you can have a strategy and a vision and a mission and a set of values, and that can be good, fine, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a competitive advantage to you. So today I want to talk about 12 of the things that these exemplar companies did. First, they made alignment job one. See, if you buy the foundational conclusion that alignment is the ultimate competitive advantage, then creating alignment is not some nice to have thing for your company. It's not some tertiary, we'll get around to it someday thing for your company. It's job one. And what we learned was that the highly aligned companies, they radically outperform their fragmented and dysfunctional competitors, which is why we say alignment is job one. As I mentioned, a misaligned executive team will never create an aligned company. So this really starts at the top. It really starts at the top. Matter of fact, one of the most interesting interviews we did was with Randy Papadelis. Randy is the now retired chief executive officer of Ocean Spray Cranberries. And Randy actually described the process of when he got promoted from COO to CEO, as the big difference was he had to become the chief alignment officer. And he actually used this phrase to describe his role in the company. And I think it's exactly right. We advise the CEOs that we talk to that they have to be the chief alignment officer. Number two, run a one company campaign. We saw dozens and dozens of examples of companies that had one company campaigns. And what we learned is that those who did it right produced exceptional results. For the most notable, perhaps, is Alan Mullally's success at Ford with the One Ford plan. During the time that he was the CEO of Ford, the stock price rebounded and more than doubled. And you can see similar results at Starbucks and Microsoft from companies who said, we're going to be one company. And we're going to build that as part of our campaign. That's what we're going to communicate. We're going to tell everybody, we're one Ford. And we're going to repeat that message over and over again. Third, build a one company culture. Build a one company culture. Peter Drucker famously said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so my apologies to all of you who are on low carb diets or haven't eaten breakfast yet, and this picture is making you hungry or whatever. But this is Peter Drucker's famous line: culture eats strategy for breakfast. And with all due respect to Mr. Drucker, I don't think that's true. What I do think is true is that companies with one company cultures eat their fragmented and dysfunctional competitors for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One of the examples we studied was the CARLYLE Group, an investment bank located here in Washington, D.C. And investment banks are perhaps notorious for being siloed fiefdoms. But the founders of CARLYLE decided that they were going to be one CARLYLE from day one. When it was just the three founders, they still had this idea that we're going to be one CARLYLE, that we're going to work as one team, regardless of whether we have multiple divisions or departments or P&Ls or we expand globally. We're going to be one CARLYLE. And they effectively built this into the culture from day one. So Henry, perhaps I'll stop now and see if there's any questions on the first couple of disciplines that are used to create a competitive advantage with alignment.
Sure. So if people want to just ask questions as they come up, either in the chat or the Q&A function. Dave, if people are not making alignment job one, where do you think people are getting distracted, or what other ways do you see executives who aren't prioritizing alignment making some common pitfalls there?
Well, right. Being an executive, being a CEO, it's a tough job, right? You're pulled in multiple dimensions. You have multiple stakeholders, you have investors, you have employees, you have society at large, you have customers, you have vendors, okay? And you get pulled by a lot of different stakeholders in a lot of different directions. But yet what we found is that some CEOs, they just really got it. They got it. They understood this idea. And so I don't mean this to sound self-serving, but I wrote my book to try to convince CEOs of this idea. And, I think that this webinar and the book and other things that try to help people understand the power of alignment. The other thing that we talked about in the Alignment 101 webinar was, how do you measure alignment? And then how do you calculate the cost of misalignment? And so those things might be helpful for you to help illustrate where your company is. If you're feeling terribly misaligned, it's one thing to say that, and it's a whole nother thing to have the data to show the executive team about how people feel about alignment. And so ideally, you build this one company culture in from day one. But if not, there's plenty of examples that we studied where companies were able to build a unified and aligned company out of one that had been previously fragmented. Ford is a notable example, and we're going to talk about some others. So to all the participants, I'd encourage you to just share your questions. I'll take a few more disciplines and stop again, and we'll have some more questions.
Dave, we have one from Paul. He asked, besides poor or less competitive financial performance, what other obvious indicators tell a CEO that he has an alignment problem?
Well, you can probably feel it in the culture surveys or in the employee engagement surveys, where people write about being siloed, fragmented, and things like that. You'll see it there. There's other surveys. We've developed some that help get at the alignment issue, and you'll see it in, for example, in your ability to consistently deliver your brand promise. Right? Because if you're not consistently delivering your brand promise, it's somewhere that in the delivery system is misaligned. You'll see it in the sense of you're hiring the wrong people. If your talent management system is misaligned, you'll hire the wrong people, you see. And so there's a number of indicators that I would look at. And to me, what we would say in the book actually is that misalignment is essentially the root cause of every problem we looked at. If we kept chasing it back, well, why is that? Why is that? Kind of the 5 whys. We'd ultimately get to some kind of misalignment. Good question, Paul. Thank you. So 4, develop one system. Develop one system. You have to have a management system to run the company. You all know that. We have some companies on the webinar that have 5 employees, all the way up to the largest I heard was 2,600. But the bigger you get, the more important this alignment management system is. And what we discovered was that there's many different kinds of alignment management systems. For example, Google uses OKRs as their system. Many companies adopted the balanced scorecard from Kaplan and Norton. Many of you perhaps are using Verne Harnish's Rockefeller habits, which is what HAGERTY Insurance uses. And we're kind of agnostic about which system you choose, but we're dogmatic in the sense that we recommend that you pick one system and use it corporate-wide and stay with it for a while, because this gives your people a common language. So if I say goal, you know what I mean. If I say strategic initiative, you know what I mean. Whereas if you have different systems, what happens is, a priority means an initiative, and somewhere else it means a goal, and people don't communicate clearly. So this is a key discipline. Pick a system and stay with it. HAGERTY is, as I mentioned, pick the Rockefeller habits, which is a great one. Leverage one model. Now let me talk a little bit about this one, because this gets to the culture, in particular, how your company operates and makes decisions. One of the most dysfunctional organizational pathologies that we see is undermining. That's where an executive team or a leadership team is evaluating a new decision, whether to go into a new market or build a new plant or enter a new product line and build a new product capability, or whatever that might be. And they go through the process of making the decision, and then afterwards, people undermine the decision. Sometimes it's kind of passive aggressive undermining. Sometimes it's more overt than that. But this is a terrible organizational pathology. And so to help companies overcome that, we recommend the debate, decide, and align model. In other words, let's have the debate. Let's have the vigorous debate. Should we open a new plant or not? Let's go through all the facts. Then we have to decide. First, you have to decide who's going to decide. This is the essence of something called decision rights. Who gets to decide and how will they decide? Okay, but ultimately you need to decide. Sometimes the CEO will say, this is my decision. I'm going to make it. Sometimes the executive will say, we're going to make the decision, with the implied sense that we're going to, in a sense, like take a vote, and a majority of the executives vote for it, then we'll do it. Or sometimes the decision is made to delegate the decision. So we might say, okay, we're going to delegate the decision about whether to make that new factory investment or not to the vice president of manufacturing, and we'll let them decide. So you have to have the debate. You have to decide. Obviously, you have to decide how you're going to decide, and then you have to decide. And then you have to build a culture that says, we're going to align with that decision, even if I disagreed with it. Even if I thought that building the plant was a dumb idea. If we decide to build the plant, I'm in on it. Okay, and this is a difficult cultural transition for many companies to make. But if you're serious about turning alignment into a competitive advantage, you have to build this into culture. 6, deliver one message. As Eugene mentioned in my intro, I spent a lot of time in sales early on in my career. And a few years ago, I was working with an executive who also started his career in sales. In his case, it was door-to-door sales, selling coupon books for automotive services like oil changes and car washes and things like that. And so if you can imagine being in door-to-door sales, you face mind-numbing levels of rejection every day. And he taught me something that I had never heard before, that the confused mind always says no. The confused mind always says no. And so one of the things that we look at is the alignment and consistency of the organization's communications. Do their internal communications match their external communications? Do their words match their actions? And if not, well, the organization shuts into neutral. Like, this is the corollary. The confused mind always says no, and the confused organization always shifts into neutral. And so we encourage people to think very clearly about the messaging that's coming out, in particular from corporate, and whether those messages are being effectively relayed all the way through the organization. And this is critical. For example, you cannot execute a strategy that you don't understand. You can't set goals that are alignment with the corporate goals if you don't know what they are. And as simple as this might sound, is to make sure you're delivering one message, it's critical, and so many companies get it wrong. Apply one process. A little while back, I took a trip out to Napa Valley, and I learned a lot about wine. And one of the things I learned is that the best wine comes from the vines that have been aggressively pruned. They've been aggressively pruned to maximize the quality of grapes, not the quantity. And so likewise, one of the disciplines that the high-performing companies we studied applied was pruning. Because if you're serious about alignment, surely there are going to be things in your business that are out of alignment. You have strategic initiatives that are out of alignment. You have spending that's out of alignment. Maybe you have some people that are out of alignment. And if you're serious about turning alignment into a competitive advantage, then you have to be serious about getting out the pruning shears, which is very, very difficult. We spoke with one CEO who had launched a major new initiative to align their entire company. And we asked them, since launching that initiative, what have you stopped doing? And the answer was nothing. And so this led to some very interesting discussions about this initiative, about the importance of it, and about taking a serious look at what needs to be pruned so that we can cut the things that are out of alignment and reinvest the resources and capabilities and talents in those that are. One of the most notable examples that we studied in the book is BASECAMP. Maybe there's some companies on the phone that use BASECAMP software to help run their business as a project management tool. But this is a great, great example. Jason Fried was the CEO of the company, and they were at an offsite meeting. And after a couple hours of the offsite meeting, Jason interrupted the meeting, and here's what he said. We spent the last couple hours talking about doing more, building more products, entering more markets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, I'd like to talk about doing less. And it was that line that then became a catalyst for BASECAMP pruning all of the products that were outside of the core BASECAMP product line. And they had several of them. They exited businesses. They even changed the name of the company from 37 Signals to BASECAMP. So they could be 100% aligned around a single unifying product strategy and not distracted by investing resources in things that were outside of that core. 8, work as one. We're a user of Box.com, maybe some of you are as well. And I noticed a couple of months ago, an ad came out from Box that had this tagline, work as one. And obviously it caught my attention. If you haven't figured this out a lot already, I use the word one a lot. My wife likes to joke that I have a one-track mind, and of course, if she says that, it must be true. But this caught my attention, work as one. And we use this in the chapter in the book to not talk about Box.com per se, but talk about the incredible power of technology to improve alignment. And so maybe some of you are Box users. Obviously, this webinar, we're using Zoom. Many people are using Slack. I talked a little bit about an incredible Wall Street Journal video that Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, did on the importance of alignment. I'd encourage you to watch that. I refer to that in webinar number 2. And last but not least, there's Align. And I am a big fan of the capabilities of Align to improve alignment. Most notably, I love the capability to create goal alignment. This is a big one. The power to have, the ability to have the corporate goals be transparent and visible in the system like Align, and then being able to use that to effectively connect the dots, if you will, between the corporate goals, the divisional goals, the department's goals, and every individual's goals. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And so I'm a fan of using technology to improve alignment. And if you're not currently an Align customer, I'd recommend that you spend some time after the webinar and get to know the folks at Align and get to know the capabilities of the tool. 9, utilize one style. Utilize one style. This is a fascinating story. Microsoft. Even though Microsoft is headquartered at One Microsoft Way, they were notorious for their silos. And as it turns out, Steve Ballmer, the former CEO of Microsoft, was having coffee with Alan Mulally, the CEO of Ford. And I mentioned earlier in the webinar the One Ford campaign. And they got to talking, and Steve Ballmer became convinced about this power of alignment. And so he came back from that meeting and launched the One Microsoft campaign. We're going to be One Microsoft. We're going to have one team. We're going to be one product line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 6 weeks later, Ballmer resigned. And frankly, the organization rejected the One Microsoft idea. A few months later, Satya Nadella was appointed as the CEO. And interesting to me, he dusted off that One Microsoft presentation from Ballmer and delivered almost the exact same message. We need to be One Microsoft. We need to work as one team. Customers don't respect our silos and our fiefdoms, he said. And he described Microsoft as being a federation of fiefdoms. So by all accounts, Satya Nadella succeeded where Ballmer failed. Why? Why? That's because leadership style matters. And here's how we say it. You lead change, but you inspire alignment. You see, Ballmer tried to use like a top-down dictatorial approach to get everybody to align, whereas Nadella took a much more softer approach. He inspired people to align. He talked about the benefits of coming together. He won them over with his personal story. And so back to the questions about how do I get my CEOs to think about this, I'd ask you to think about this quote: you lead change, but you inspire alignment. You might think of it as alignment is a pull, not a push. And Meet 101. We're a big fan of one-on-one meetings. This is another capability, of course, that the Align software can help automate, so that not only can you say we're going to have one-on-one meetings, you can actually track them and quantify the impact that they're having, and track the follow-up actions of all of these one-on-one meetings and huddles and things like that. So we're a big fan of the one-on-one meetings, and I'd encourage you to think about using them. So Henry, maybe there's some other questions queued up, so I want to stop and allow for some interaction and see if we got some other ones.
Sure. So one question on, I think, kind of that top-down management style that you're talking about, going back to the leverage one model and the debate, decide, and align. How do you balance making decisions and making decisions effectively with the avoidance of that top-down decision making that can make alignment tougher?
Yes, well, some decisions are made at the top. Some decisions are CEO decisions, but rarely are they unilateral, where the CEO makes them without talking to anybody. Rarely does that happen. So, I think that in today's world, having a collaborative model of decision making and also having clarity about decision rights. In other words, this decision that we have to make, whose decision is it? It's the second part of the model. You have to decide who's going to decide. And having clarity around that is a key component for getting the teams to work well together. Because if Henry, we're working together, and I know at the end of the day, it's your call. Like, I might have an opinion on the issue, but it's Henry's call. Well, then I have to respect that, because it might be the other way the next time. It might be we're working on something and it's my call and I get to decide. And so this is just a cultural tool to help build effective decision making in your company. And specifically, then the third component is root out the undermining, because it's not debate, decide, and undermine. It's debate, decide, and align. And this just has to just weave its way through the culture of your company. Hey, we made this decision, and let's stop undermining it. Let's stop talking about it at the water cooler and saying, one of the things we listen for is the pronouns. When people start using third-person pronouns, like they made a dumb decision, that is a huge red flag. And I would encourage the members of the Align team and those on the webinar to listen for the pronouns. It sounds silly, but listen for the pronouns that people use when they talk about decisions that were made. Do they say we made the decision or they? And this is a key component. You have some other ones?
I think we can keep moving for now. Oh,
okay.
Here's one from James. He says, what about businesses that have two divisions?
Yes.
For example, retail nutritional stores that carry third-party products and an online brand that is sold in the retail store.
Yes.
Should alignment cross over the divisions or be kept separate? And I know this is something that you've talked about in the past, but want to.
Yes, Henry, who was it that's the question?
That's from James.
James, James, that's a fantastic question. We have a line. As companies grow, they create divisions. There's only one problem. Divisions, by definition, divide. And so this is something that you have to really work through. Now, there are some companies that operate like a company of companies. We talked about some of the examples of these. Berkshire Hathaway, for example, Virgin, for example. They operate like as a company of companies, and their divisions are really like separate companies that are glued together with a very thin veneer of alignment at the top. But most companies, when they create divisions in order to right size the business, maybe they're different target customers or product lines, maybe a little bit like in your case there. But then you have to say that we're not going to let the divisions divide us. We're not going to let the divisions become federations of fiefdoms like they were at Microsoft. We're going to try to create alignment between those divisions. And there's lots of ways to do this. Most notably, you might think about would be compensation. So how are the executives compensated? What percentage of the executive comp is tied to corporate performance versus their own individual division? See, if the incentives incentivize executives to work on their own, well, then they might collaborate a little bit, but they're not incentivized to collaborate and work cross-divisionally. Another one, and I'll tell you the case study in a minute where this comes from, is cross-functional rotation. And this is a talent management discipline that forces people to move between the divisions, so that pretty soon you're in this division and you think the people in the other division, well, they're the enemy. They don't know what they're doing. And then we rotate you over there, and next thing you know, well, they're not so bad after all, because now you're one of them. And so these are some of the tricks that companies use to try to keep the divisions from becoming divisive and fiefdoms and essentially siloed, which break down the whole point of the one company in the beginning. So it is a really good question. It's a tricky issue. As companies grow, they create divisions, they expand globally. All of these create systemic barriers to alignment that you have to overcome, which is why we're going through these best practices. And so let's talk about the next one, plan on 1 decade. The fact of the matter is alignment is a long uphill climb, especially if you have allowed your company to get fragmented and become that federation of fiefdoms. So Alan Mulally, 8-10 years at Ford. Nadella, it's been 5 years already at Microsoft, and he's been working on this to break these barriers down. But it's a long uphill climb. One of the most interesting case studies and CEOs we interviewed was Gail McGovern, who's the CEO of the American Red Cross. She came into the American Red Cross in 2008. And somewhat like this picture, the organization was underwater. It was losing $200 million a year and had to borrow money to make payroll. Each Red Cross chapter was set up as a separate entity. So there were really 720 different Red Crosses, each run by their own CEO, each with their own board, each with their own P&L, each with their own website, each with their own financial systems, et cetera, et cetera. And she recognized immediately that this was unsustainable and implemented a One Red Cross campaign to kind of reunify the Red Cross. And so I spoke with her a couple of months ago, and she's still at it, trying to keep the organization aligned, because alignment's not a once and done. It's an everyday battle to keep it from being fragmented again. And but this is a long uphill climb to create alignment, especially if you become very fragmented. So as you undertake this, the advice we give our clients is, don't do this if you're going to give up, 2 quarters from now. Don't launch a one ABC company initiative if, by the time we get to 2020, you'll lose interest in it. Don't bother, because it'll just hurt you more than it helps you. And so I think this is an important lesson that we learned, is that especially if you're fragmented, it takes a while. It takes a while to make all these changes systemic through the organization. And the last best practice is, we've talked a lot about corporate alignment initiatives and, the executive team and everything else like that. But ultimately, alignment starts with one person, and that's you. That's you. You have to say, am I aligned? Back to the first person or third person pronouns. Am I aligned? Are my goals aligned with the corporate goals? Are my behaviors aligned with the corporate values? Is my vision aligned with the corporate vision? And so, this is where we try to land the plane, because at the end of the day, we're going to build alignment one person at a time. And so it's incumbent on the company to go through the 12 accelerators, as I mentioned, and make sure that the strategy is clear, the brand promise is clear, the mission critical processes are clear, and all of that. But at the end of the day, we're going to ask people to align with those. You know, you can't really tell people anymore. It doesn't really work that way, unless, you know, in North Korea, maybe it works, but not many places, right? You have to, back to the leadership style, you have to inspire them to align. You ask them to align. You pull alignment. And so ultimately, it starts with one person, and that's you. And so I'd encourage you to think about that just for yourself, you know, and are you being an alignment champion for your company? My hunch is if you're on the call, the answer is yes. But, and then how can you make that contagious in your firm? So, and just in the spirit of over-delivering, I just want to share one more idea that we found that is beyond the 12, and that's leverage outside help. See, alignment, you know, it's not for the faint of heart, you know. It's going to cause your company to have to confront some really deep-seated issues, most cases. You know, there's going to be elephants in the room that you're going to have to talk about, and skeletons in the closet that are going to have to come out, and long-standing, you know, mistrust between organizations or executives that's going to have to get dealt with. And these are exactly the kinds of issues that often an outsider can help with. And that outsider could be a software vendor, perhaps like Align, or perhaps many of the business coaches that are associated with Align and the Rockefeller habits, or obviously, you know, this is what ShiftPoints does. And what we've learned is that sometimes it's helpful to have an outsider to provide some guidance and to pull the initiative along and show people the way. And so for all of the coaches on the call, I'd encourage you to, you know, play that role for your clients, because they need the outside help. And if you're on the call and you don't have somebody from the outside helping you, I'd encourage you to find a good business coach that really understands the power of alignment and how to help you navigate the change and soar to the heights that your company wants to get to. So with that, I want to just thank you, thank Align again, and Henry, I'll stay and answer as many questions as there are the rest of the hour.
Great. Well, yeah, we encourage anyone to continue submitting questions. One question we've been thinking about is, so given alignment is challenging and this can be a multi-year endeavor, how do alignment champions create those short-term wins that can show their team and their company that alignment is making a difference, and keep those efforts moving forward?
Boy, that's a great question, Henry. And we advise companies to run these alignment initiatives in 90-day sprints, so we can lock down things that we can accomplish in 90 days, and then we accomplish and launch them. And then we, you know, in the third quarter, we're doing another round, and fourth quarter, we're doing another round. And that allows us to, you know, eat the elephant a bite at a time, if you will. One of the other things we really like is to create, in effect, an alignment war room where, for example, we had one company where every division had their own set of mission statements, vision statements, and core values. And we basically taped them all to a wall in a conference room to help illustrate the misalignment, and then help everybody visualize the process of developing one vision and one mission and one set of values. And so the war room can be a very effective trick. Many companies have essentially, like they call them program management offices, where somebody's actually assigned to manage the alignment initiatives. And so, you know, this again, it's a long, hard slog, and I think that it takes discipline and will, and it takes someone to manage it. And you know, maybe many of the people on the call are actually performing that function in their company. And so I encourage them.
Dave, is it your suggestion or recommendation that a company should only focus on one alignment initiative per 90-day quarter?
Well, I think it depends on how fouled up they are, you know, but that can work. Let's say, for example, we're going through with a client right now where one of the things that was missing was a clear and compelling and differentiating brand promise. And so that has been probably 2 quarters worth of work to try to go through with an outside agency and try to land the plane. And a matter of fact, today that team is evaluating the recommendations on what their brand promise should be. And so, hopefully we'll get that locked down and then start rolling that into the organization with communications and training and things like that. So we have a little 3x3 matrix that helps people understand where to invest their alignment effort. So if you can imagine, on one axis of the matrix is your performance along that dimension of alignment, and the other is the importance or the urgency, perhaps. And so you might think of this case where the performance of the brand promise was low, and they deemed it to be urgent, so it became that became the high priority quadrant. So that can be a trick to say, let's go through those 12 components of the methodology and say, where would we rank them on a matrix that allows us to prioritize them, and where's the big ROI benefit for our company.
Mm-hmm. This is just a comment from Tomas. He says, we changed our names from, they stopped referring to divisions to calling them business units with teams inside. And he says, like you said, the word division already says separation, not alignment. And so it was a sales unit instead of sales division. And yes, inside is the retail sales team, wholesalers team, etc. But changing just the language to get more of that spirit of alignment.
That's perfect. Thanks for sharing that example. I love that. Divisions, the business units, it sounds a little softer, doesn't it? That doesn't quite sound so separating. And so that's a great suggestion. And the language matters. Language matters. Some of these soft things that seem little, they end up being really important.
And then one question from Paul. He says, in the spirit of seeking help, I think particularly with the business coaches, do you have any suggestions on good strategies for introducing the help so that distractors, or people who are not so don't see necessarily the need can get more easily on board and ensure the success of the alignment initiative?
Yes, that's a great question, because it's tricky to come in from the outside. And some companies are like, oh, great, another consultant, just what we need, and there can be, rejection of that person. Well, what do we need this person for? We can do it ourselves or whatever. And so I think it's wise to have that person's introduction managed properly, to have the scope of their work clear. And in my personal case, I only take the engagement if the CEO is the client. Because with all due respect, I found that if I'm working at different levels in the organization, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to get the support and buy-in. And that's just my personal rule. But, clearly the coach has to have the credibility. They have to have the temperament to be able to understand the culture of the organization that exists now, to have the stamina to stick through the difficult changes. They have to have the stomach to be able to say the hard things and point out the elephant in the room. And that can be tricky, right? So I have personally been fired for pointing out the elephant in the room that the CEO didn't want to talk about. So it's wise to consider those options as you think about bringing an outsider in and managing that transition and their role.
Great. Well, Dave, I think we can wrap things up. Afterwards, we will certainly send out the link to the recording. I know you put together a one-page summary handout that people can download and share around their organization if they want to share the outcome of the webinar. And we just want to thank you so much for putting these webinars on and helping us with this content. And I think it's been very valuable. I think Eugene is.
And Dave, would you like to sort of reiterate the title of your upcoming book, when it will be released, and how people can get it?
Yes, thanks for the softball. Yeah, the book is called Drive One Direction: How to Unleash the Accelerating Power of Alignment. The launch date is the 23rd. of this month. And so it'll primarily be available on Amazon is the primary distribution channel. But I hope it's a helpful resource. As I mentioned, there's 50 case studies of exemplar companies in there. And every one of those case studies is 1 page long. So it's a really easy read. And you know, super excited to say that Alan Mullaly, the CEO of Ford, endorsed the book. He wrote the foreword and has been a gracious supporter of the initiative. And I really just hope that it's helpful to you, because let me just close with this. I had 5 back-to-back professional experiences where misalignment was the root cause of just massive organizational dysfunction. It was horrible. And so after the 5th one, I said, I need to fix this. I need to help companies address this problem, because life is too short to work in a dysfunctional organization. And so my hope is very simple, that the resources, the webinars, the stuff that Align puts out will help you improve alignment in your company, which makes life better for everybody. So again, thanks to the Align team. My apologies for my technical snafus in the beginning, and I hope that the material ultimately was incredibly valuable to you. But thanks.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you to all of our attendees, and please join us. I think our next coaching webinar date is October 2nd, if I'm correct. Actually, give me just 1 second. Yes, it will be on October 2nd at 10 a.m. Central, where we will have Coach Glenn Dahl, who will be discussing BHAGs and how to select an appropriate BHAG and why it is important to have that North Star to guide the direction and focus and alignment of your organization. So we hope you'll join us. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.